Imagine this. You're walking down a crowded street, and someone bumps into you, hard. Your coffee spills, your shirt is ruined, but before you can even react, you smile and say, "It's okay." But it's not okay. Your chest tightens, your thoughts rage, but none of it escapes your lips. You carry on, silently bleeding civility. That night, you replay the moment, wishing you had said something, done something, anything. But instead, you were nice. Now imagine this isn't a one-off. Imagine a life where every disagreement becomes an apology, where every boundary gets blurred by a soft voice, where your desires dissolve into the background noise of other people's comfort. A life where you're endlessly agreeable, pleasant, accommodating, inoffensive, until one day you no longer recognize who you are beneath the performance. And the world rewards you for it. You get praise for being easygoing. Doors open not because you demand them, but because you hold them open for others. You're told, "You're such a good person." You smile. You thank them. But a quiet question begins to echo in the back of your mind. If I'm so good, why do I feel so empty? Niceness. It sounds innocent, harmless, even noble. But what if that very virtue, the one drilled into you since childhood, was never about goodness at all? What if it was about control? What if it was about fear? What if it was a prison dressed in politeness? We teach children to be nice before they even know what they believe. Say thank you. Smile. Don't talk back. We punish anger, defiance, and resistance. We label them bad behavior, not realizing we are teaching them to swallow their truth in exchange for acceptance. And the lesson never ends. You grow up and learn how the world works, not by truth, but by approval. In the boardroom, on dates, in friendships, you learn to bite your tongue, to smile through resentment, to dress your discomfort in diplomacy. You become fluent in self-erasure. You confuse peace with passivity. You become nice, but not real, not honest, not free. Because niceness, when rooted in fear, is not a virtue. It's a disguise. It's a survival tactic dressed in social grace. So here's the paradox. The nicer you are, the more invisible you become. The more agreeable you are, the less people respect you. The more you accommodate others, the more they take and take and take. Until one day, you look around and realize that everyone is comfortable except you. The trap doesn't look like a cage. It looks like a compliment. You're so understanding. You're such a good listener. You're the kind of person who never causes problems. You're agreeable. You're useful. You're nice. But you're also exhausted, unseen, unheard. And here's the existential rupture. What if your niceness isn't a reflection of your character, but a reaction to your conditioning? What if being liked has cost you being known? What if you've built a life that everyone admires, except the parts of you you've buried just to keep it all together? We often think of rebellion as loud and violent, but sometimes rebellion is simply saying no without explanation. Sometimes it's choosing authenticity over approval. Sometimes it's letting the world misunderstand you so you can finally understand yourself. But to get there, you have to ask a terrifying question, one that your niceness has shielded you from your entire life. Who am I when I stop trying to be good? This is not about becoming cruel. It's about becoming whole. Because buried beneath that polished smile and practiced politeness is a raw, unfiltered self, aching to speak, to feel, to be. And until you confront the reason you've made niceness your armor, you will never know if the love you receive is for you, or for the mask you've worn so long it became your face. So pause. Look back at your life, not at what you've achieved or avoided, but at what you've sacrificed in the name of being liked. How many times have you betrayed your truth just to make someone else comfortable? How many yeses were really no's, wearing makeup? How many friendships, relationships, opportunities have been built on the sandcastle of being palatable instead of powerful? And the most haunting question of all, what would happen if you stopped being nice and started being real?
The Philosophy of Obedience. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who danced with the idea of becoming who you truly are, the Übermensch, warned against what he called slave morality. In his view, niceness was often not moral at all, but reactive, a way for the weak to feel righteous through submission. He argued that what society deems good is often just what is harmless. Nice people are safe. They don't threaten the structure. They conform. They obey. And here lies a brutal paradox. Niceness is not a sign of strength, but of domestication. It is the morality of those trained to serve the system. It thrives in institutions, schools, workplaces, religions, not because it breeds goodness, but because it breeds compliance. Nietzsche's warning is, if you live only to be good in the eyes of others, you may never learn what is good in your own soul. Psychological roots, the fear beneath the smile. Fast forward to adulthood. You've grown up. You've done everything right. You're considerate. You're reliable. You're admired. But you're also afraid. Afraid of disappointing others. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of being called difficult, rude, or selfish. Psychologists call this people-pleasing, a behavioral pattern born not of kindness, but of hypervigilance, often the result of trauma, neglect, or inconsistent love. People-pleasing is a form of fawn response, a survival mechanism where the nervous system learns to neutralize danger by appeasing it. In short, you learn to survive by becoming who others needed you to be. And what does that look like? You over-apologize for things that aren't your fault. You feel guilty when you assert your needs. You avoid conflict at all costs. You secretly resent others for the space they take up, but can't bring yourself to stop giving. This isn't compassion. It's self-erasure. And the most terrifying part? The longer you do it, the harder it is to tell the difference between who you are and who you've become to keep the peace. Existential obedience. Sartre and the self for others. Jean-Paul Sartre introduced the idea of bad faith, the act of lying to oneself in order to avoid the anxiety of freedom. Niceness, in many cases, is precisely that, a lie we tell ourselves to avoid the unbearable truth that freedom means responsibility. To choose yourself, to say no, to disappoint, to walk away, is to confront a freedom most people aren't ready for. So instead, you defer. You dissolve. You delay your own becoming for the comfort of others. And you smile while doing it. But deep down, you know. You know every time you don't speak up. You know every time you put someone else's needs before your own, not out of love, but out of fear. You know when your yes is really a no, and your calm is really a mask for quiet rage. This is what Sartre meant when he described the self for others. A self that exists only in the gaze of others. A self that becomes a thing, predictable, safe, defined by external expectations. You are no longer the author of your life. You are the character in someone else's script. The cultural lie of niceness. Aldous Huxley warned us in Brave New World of a society that would not control through violence, but through pleasure, sedation, and conformity. Niceness is a tool of that sedation. It turns passion into politeness, authenticity into performance, anger into apology. It tells you that your worth is measured by your agreeability, and it sells this lie through every medium. The heroine in movies who wins by being sweet. The job interview that rewards soft-spoken enthusiasm. The dating advice that says, don't be too intense. Be likable. Be nice. Be digestible. And you wonder why you feel like you're disappearing.
Here lies the silent torment. You were trained to be nice before you ever learned how to be whole. You were taught how to comfort others before you ever learned how to sit with your own discomfort. You were told who to be before you had the chance to discover who you are. And the tragedy is not just personal, it's collective. We live in a world full of polite liars. People who smile while breaking inside, who nod while screaming internally, who give endlessly while their souls grow silent from lack of oxygen. But there is something brewing beneath that silence, a quiet rebellion, a longing to be known not for your pleasantries, but for your full, unfiltered truth. And now, as the mask begins to crack, the next question arises. What is the cost of staying nice? And what happens when the performance finally ends? At first, the cost seems small. You hold your tongue here, offer a favor there. You swallow a comment, laugh at a joke that stings, apologize for someone else's mistake. It doesn't feel like betrayal, just courtesy. But a life of small silences eventually becomes a graveyard, not of bodies, but of selves, versions of you that could have lived had you not made comfort your God. This is the unseen carnage of chronic niceness. Not shattered windows or raised voices, but the quiet decay of boundaries, identity, and truth. And the consequences? They are everywhere, hidden in plain sight. The erosion of identity. You wake up one day unsure of what you want. Not because you're indecisive, but because you've spent so long asking, what do they want from me? You've made your personality a mirror, reflecting whatever people need to feel safe, validated, loved. And slowly, piece by piece, you disappear. Psychologist Carl Rogers spoke of incongruence, the gap between your authentic self and the self you present to the world. The wider the gap, the more fragmented you become. And niceness, when performed instead of embodied, widens that chasm with every unspoken truth. You might still function, you might still succeed,
But underneath, you're exhausted, numb, disconnected from your own desires. You've confused being needed with being loved. You've confused being agreeable with being worthy. And this confusion comes with a deep psychological price. You lose the ability to distinguish between who you truly are and who you've learned to be. The resentment beneath the smile. Niceness seems like a gift, but gifts given in fear or expectation are not generosity. They are manipulation in disguise. And here's the thing. Nice people often become the most resentful people. Why? Because when you say yes out of fear instead of freedom, when you give to avoid conflict rather than from genuine care, when you make everyone comfortable but yourself, you begin to rot inside. Not visibly, not dramatically, but slowly. Like a smile stretched too long across a face that just wants to scream. The resentment builds. You start to keep score. I helped them when they needed it. I always listen, but they never ask about me. I bend, I compromise, I give, but no one notices. And the deeper this resentment grows, the more toxic your relationships become. Ironically, the very relationships you tried to preserve by being nice. This is the emotional paradox. You betray yourself in the name of connection, only to end up more isolated than ever. Neuroscience, the brain on people-pleasing. Let's shift to the brain. When you say yes to something you don't want to do, just to avoid disapproval, your brain activates the amygdala, the same region triggered in moments of threat or danger. Why? Because people-pleasing is often a stress response. You're not making a conscious choice. You're reacting, trying to avoid conflict the same way a deer avoids a predator. Over time, this becomes hardwired. You associate boundaries with danger, authenticity with rejection. Your nervous system learns to equate being liked with survival. This is not kindness. This is fear, wearing a polite face. And the more you reinforce this loop, the harder it becomes to break. Eventually, you don't even feel the spike of anxiety anymore. It just feels normal to betray yourself. Social conditioning and cultural biases. Society doesn't just tolerate niceness, it depends on it, especially from certain groups. Women are expected to be nurturing, accommodating, soft-spoken. People of color are often pressured to appear non-threatening, agreeable, deferential. Service workers are trained to smile through abuse. Children are taught to obey, not to express. In many cultures, niceness isn't just encouraged, it's weaponized. Because the nicer you are, the easier you are to control. You don't cause waves. You don't challenge systems. You don't rebel. You say thank you when you're hurt. You say sorry when you're violated. You say I understand when everything in your body is screaming no. And the world claps because your silence keeps it running smoothly.
The niceness feedback loop. Here's the cruelest twist. The more nice you are, the more people expect it. They stop asking how you're doing. They stop noticing when you're stretched too thin. They take your emotional labor as currency that never runs dry. But eventually it does. You burn out. You pull away. You disappear not as an act of anger, but as a desperate attempt to breathe. And what happens? People call you selfish. They ask why you changed. They resent the version of you that finally set boundaries. Because your niceness was never about you. It was about them. And when the mask slips, people mourn the loss of their comfort, not your freedom. Relationships built on performative peace. Look at your relationships. The ones that only survive because you never speak your mind. The ones where love is conditional on how easy you are to deal with. The ones where discomfort is taboo and honesty is a threat. These are not real connections. They are contracts. Unspoken agreements that say, I will pretend to be who you need me to be if you promise to like me. But eventually, pretending kills intimacy. Because love without truth is performance. And performance, no matter how skilled, always ends in collapse. The silent epidemic. We are facing a quiet epidemic. Not of violence, but of invisible emotional death. Of people who smile while their souls wither. Who help others but cannot ask for help themselves. Who are praised for being nice, but who, in the private darkness of their own minds, are haunted by the question, does anyone truly know me? That is the final cost. Not the missed opportunities, not the burnout, not even the resentment. The real cost is disconnection from your truth, from your power, from the kind of love that only reveals itself once you stop performing and start showing up fully, vulnerably, unapologetically. And if that kind of love never arrives, at least you will have found something more vital, yourself. But that self, it can't be born through niceness. It must be forged in truth. And truth, by its nature, disrupts. So the next time you catch yourself about to smile when you want to scream, ask yourself, am I choosing kindness or am I avoiding rejection? Am I being real or just rehearsed? Am I alive or just approved of? Because somewhere in the silence of your suppressed self, a rebellion is waiting to begin. Something breaks. It doesn't always come with a scream. Sometimes it's just a whisper inside you. A trembling, final protest from the part of you that's been silenced for too long. You feel it when you say yes, but every cell in your body aches with no. You feel it when your chest tightens at another demand, another sacrifice, another compliment you didn't earn but accepted anyway. Because nice people don't rock the boat. But what if rocking the boat is the only way to avoid drowning? This is your rebellion. Not with fists, not with fury, but with truth. The kind that costs you everything you thought made you good. Because freedom doesn't start with being liked. It starts with being real.
Step 1. Shatter the lie. You were told niceness is virtue, that being agreeable is admirable, that sacrifice is holy, that saying no is cruel, that your worth is directly tied to how easy you are to love. But every part of that story was designed to keep you contained. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe the world your convenience. And most importantly, you don't owe anyone a version of yourself that exists solely for their comfort. The first act of rebellion is simple, but terrifying. Name the lie. Say it out loud. Write it down. Dare to declare,
My niceness is not my nature. It was my survival strategy. And then ask, what would it mean to stop surviving and start living?
Step 2. Remember your anger. You were taught that anger is dangerous, that it's impolite, unbecoming, especially if you're a woman, especially if you're a person of color, especially if you were raised in a household where conflict meant chaos. But anger is not destruction. Anger is clarity. It tells you when your boundaries have been crossed. It tells you when you're being used. It tells you that something inside you knows you deserve more. Philosopher Martha Nussbaum calls anger a transition emotion, not an end point, but a signal that something sacred has been violated. Reclaim your anger. Not to weaponize it, but to listen to it. Because for the nice person, anger is often the first true voice you've had in years. Step 3. Choose discomfort over disappearance. You don't break the habit of niceness by becoming rude. You break it by choosing truth, even when it makes the room go silent, even when it disappoints someone, even when they don't understand. That's the hardest part. Not screaming no, but whispering it calmly. Not defending your boundaries, but refusing to justify them. Not asking for permission, but acting from inner authority. Discomfort is not cruelty. Discomfort is growth. And if someone walks away from your truth, let them. If they were only staying for the performance, they were never really with you. Step 4. Make peace with being misunderstood. Here's the truth most people avoid their whole lives. You will be misunderstood, especially when you stop being nice, especially when you stop people-pleasing, especially when you begin to embody your full, unfiltered self. People will say, "You've changed. You're cold now. You're too much. You're selfish." But they are not talking about you. They are talking about the loss of the version of you who made their life easier. Let them grieve that version. That was their comfort, not your calling. Your rebellion requires courage, not to fight, but to be fully seen. Not everyone will stay when you take off the mask, but the ones who remain, they will know you. They will love you. Not the act, not the illusion. You. Step 5. Rebuild from within. Viktor Frankl wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. For the chronically nice, that space has been swallowed by habit. It's time to reclaim it. The next time someone demands your time, your energy, your compliance, pause. Don't rush to answer. Let the silence stretch. Let the nervous system react, and let it pass. Then ask yourself, do I actually want this? Am I saying yes from truth or fear? If I say no, what part of me believes I'll lose love or safety? The rebellion doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's a quiet boundary. Sometimes it's deleting a message instead of replying. Sometimes it's saying, "I need space," and not apologizing for it. Small acts, sacred acts. The building blocks of a self not built from others' expectations, but from inner alignment.
Step 6. Surround yourself with the untamed.
No one escapes the trap of niceness alone, because you were conditioned to be nice by other people. And so it takes other people, real ones, raw ones, untamed ones, to help pull you back into truth. Find those who challenge you, not for the sake of conflict, but for the sake of authenticity. Find those who let you be messy, loud, angry, complicated. People who don't flinch when you speak your truth. People who can hold space for your no without making it mean rejection. You're not looking for perfect relationships. You're looking for real ones. Forged in discomfort, refined in truth, sustained by mutual respect, not silent sacrifice. These are the people who will remind you that you were never too much, you were just too honest for the performance. Step 7. Redefine what it means to be good. The rebellion is not about becoming cruel. It's about reclaiming goodness from the grip of obedience. Goodness is not shrinking so others can shine. It's shining so others remember they can too. Goodness is not silence in the face of injustice. It's the courage to speak even when your voice shakes. Goodness is not comfort at all costs. It's choosing discomfort that leads to liberation. You were never here to be liked. You were here to be whole. And wholeness includes your fire, your boundaries, your anger, your depth. True goodness has edges. It cuts through lies. It doesn't bow. It becomes. You were raised to believe rebellion is loud, but sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a hand pulled back instead of offered again. A breath taken before saying yes. A silence held when you would have filled it with apology. Sometimes rebellion is as simple and as terrifying as this. You finally stop asking for permission to exist. And in that moment, everything begins to change. It begins in stillness. No applause, no roaring triumph, just a long-awaited breath, untethered, uncurated, entirely your own. You sit with it unsure at first. It feels alien, like touching a part of yourself you thought had long decayed. And then it hits you. Not like a thought, not like an idea, but like a remembering. A knowing that was always there, buried beneath years of smiling through discomfort, nodding through injustice, softening yourself for the world's fragile edges. The truth doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It waits. And when you're finally quiet enough, when the performance ends, it rises and whispers, "You were never meant to be nice. You were meant to be whole." The great reversal. Everything you thought was virtue, your agreeableness, your politeness, your predictability, was often a performance rehearsed so well you forgot it was a role. But the deepest truth is this: niceness was never love. It was a survival mask. You thought being liked was safety. You thought not upsetting others was goodness. You thought pleasing them would bring connection. But here's the paradox. The more agreeable you became, the more disconnected you felt. Because every time you gave up a boundary to preserve peace, you weren't keeping love alive. You were starving it of oxygen. Love built on false selfhood is not love. It's dependency. It's fear. It's a cage made of validation. The soul's quiet revolution. You can only fake yourself for so long. Eventually, the psyche rebels. Carl Jung warned us of this. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that privilege demands a cost. The death of the mask.
And the deeper realization, the one that collapses the entire scaffolding of your old self, is this: niceness is not compassion. People-pleasing is not empathy. Self-erasure is not virtue. They are all imitations, echoes, false gods. Because real compassion includes truth, real empathy includes boundaries, and real virtue never demands the sacrifice of your own soul. What you mistook for morality was conditioning. You were not born nice. You were made nice. Through reward and punishment, through shame and praise, through cultural scripts that said, good kids don't talk back. Don't make a scene. Keep the peace. Always smile. You absorbed it like oxygen until you couldn't tell the difference between kindness and compliance, between respect and repression, between peace and silence. But the deepest realization? Most of what you believed was goodness was just fear in costume. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being seen in your entirety and being unloved for it. That wasn't morality. That was survival.
Your niceness was a cage built from love starved of truth. At its core, niceness is the attempt to be everything to everyone, except to yourself. You said yes so often, your own needs became a mystery. You helped so much, you forgot how to ask for help. You gave so endlessly, you began to feel guilty for receiving. And then the guilt became chronic. The anxiety became normal. And the silence became so constant, you forgot what your real voice even sounded like. Here is where the great fracture forms. You were loved for the version of you that performed, not for the one who actually lives inside. And that realization breaks you. But that breaking is holy. Because it is only when the illusion dies that truth can be born. The birth of wholeness. Wholeness is not perfection. Wholeness is integration. It's owning your light and your shadows, your sweetness and your fire. Your rage, your grief, your no, your enough, your I'm done, without dressing it in apology. It is the most radical thing a once nice person can do. Become unashamed of their entire being. And when you do, you find something far beyond the shallow approval of being liked. You find peace. A peace that doesn't depend on performance. A peace that doesn't require consensus. A peace that says, I am not here to be palatable. I am here to be true. You were never too much. You were never too harsh. You were just too honest for a world addicted to comfort. A world that prefers you quiet, predictable, polished. But you weren't born for that world. You were born for fire, for depth, for unshakable selfhood. The world needs your honesty more than your harmony. It needs your authenticity more than your approval. It needs your soul more than your smile. And maybe, just maybe, It needs your holy refusal to keep disappearing for others' convenience. The paradox of freedom. Here is the final truth. You do not find yourself by being good. You find yourself by being honest. And when you become honest, brutally, beautifully honest, you will be rejected. But in those rejections, you will find your people, your path, your peace. You will become dangerous, not because you harm, but because you can no longer be controlled. That is what freedom truly is. Not rebellion for its own sake, but a return to original wholeness. A return to the self you were before they trained you to be digestible. The cinematic end and the sacred beginning. So what happens next? You walk through the world unmasked. Still kind, but no longer compliant. Still open, but no longer exposed. Still generous, but no longer sacrificial. You walk with the calm, grounded presence of someone who no longer barters their soul for belonging. And people will notice. Some will walk away. Let them. Some will misunderstand. Let them. Because the ones who stay, the ones who meet you in your raw, unfiltered self, they will know what it means to be truly alive, to be in the presence of someone who does not bend to be loved, but who stands fully, without shame, in the sacred light of their own being. This is the gift you give the world when you break the spell of niceness. You remind others that they too can come home to themselves. No masks. No scripts. No bargains. Just truth. And the kind of love that can only be born from it. So, now you know. Niceness was the costume. Fear was the director. And love, the real kind, was waiting behind the curtain whispering, "You were never meant to perform. You were meant to feel, to live, to roar, and finally, to be."